actually boasts of this, what he calls the accountability play, as our secret sauce, so to speak. And it's causing what Matt was referring to as this representation crisis, because this party has become accountable to an arch-right small group of donors who are far to the right of even the party's voters. So, having turned one of our major political parties into a delivery vehicle for their agenda, the donor network then turned public choice thought into a step-by-step strategy centered on the states to transform our country into a place none of us would recognize and few of us would want to live. That project took off with a big bang here in Wisconsin in 2011 when Scott Walker applied Buchanan's ideas in a bid to destroy the power of public sector labor unions. And what's his name, Rick Eisenberg of the Wisconsin Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty actually boasted at the time that this was public choice ideas. And anyway, very interesting, but we didn't know to look for it then. That move was the first of many interrelated plays and the one on which the rest depended. I think it's worth pausing a moment to say why that was the case. That was because unions were the leading source of countervailing power to corporations, because unions lobbied and worked for public goods that cost taxpayers money, and the right had made it nearly impossible to talk about raising taxes. It was also true because unions turn out pro-public sector voters, and not least, I think, because unions keep alive values like fairness, solidarity, and sustainability. And Wisconsin, as you know, in the wake of that, has become the latest state to authorize this Article 5 Constitutional Convention. My own state of North Carolina similarly became a laboratory for this big bang, as the donors boasted of it, one that shifted North Carolina from being a beacon of possibility in the wider South to being a competitor with Mississippi, for which state would do less for the people. In Washington, too, we witnessed the impact of the weaponization of these ideas in the steady escalation of tactical warfare by the Republican right in Congress, pushed to brinkmanship against the Obama administration by the Koch donor network, which was determined to ensure that citizens not have any reason to believe in government again. They fought, as you know, take no prisoners style on everything: the Affordable Care Act, card check for labor unions, immigration reform, court appointments, environmental regulations, reproductive rights, and more. And then, having gotten every Republican frontrunner, every one of the people that were believed to be the viable candidates, to carry their agenda, they created a field so toxic that Donald Trump managed to win. And now, lo and behold, although the media seem incapable of connecting these two stories, most of the media, the Koch wish list is being granted with epic speed by the Trump administration on everything from health care and taxation to the environment, education, the judiciary, and on and on. Now, the point I would like to leave you with before we shift into discussion of how this operation can be stopped, which I believe it can, is this. I think we need to stop imagining Donald Trump as the author of the mess that we are in. As another reader expressed to me, also from the medical field, he is the tumor, not the cancer. And the cancer treatment begins with recognizing that for all the toxicity he has unleashed, he is, in essence, the distractor in chief. Yeah. He is keeping us focused on shiny objects over there, his daily tweets, and all the horrific things he does while the Koch agenda moves through every federal department and agency and through the courts. The Koch network brought us to this point, and any viable solution will require exposing this project, understanding it, dealing with it, including on campuses like the University of Wisconsin, which now has, I think, 2 or 3 Koch implants. We can talk about that. And also, above all, engaging in some long-term, strategic, interrelated plays for democracy. And I was thrilled to hear Matt talking about the things that you're working on in this group, because I think they're really important. And I would just end here that we are at a moment, I believe as a historian, that is going to be a historic turning point, one way or another, for our society, for the future, for our children, our children's children, generations to come. I have outlined to you a very serious strategy from the right, very sophisticated, very well funded, very well thought out, that is pushing to transform our society. But I also believe profoundly that they are pushing an agenda that the majority of the American people would not support. I do not believe even the majority of Republican voters would support this agenda if they saw it. And I think that there are signs of hope all around us for how our democracy can be defended and reinvented. We see it in a huge surge of energy in local politics, in the indivisible, and our revolution groups that have been so active since 2016. We see it among the courageous Parkland students and all the other young people they've moved into action with the March for Our Lives. We see it in the continuing work of Black Lives Matter to help us appreciate the dignity and the rights of every citizen. We see it in the red state teachers' rebellions against this horrible regime of austerity. All of these people are understanding that we are at an all-hands-on-deck moment for our democracy. And so this, I believe, is a very good time to get involved, and I'm glad that you have a group as great as this to be part of that, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
That was great. It was tremendous tour of the horizon, such as it is. So we're going to take questions for 15, 20 minutes, and there's a microphone going around. So if you could limit the questions to short questions, and that would be great. Thanks.
Thank you. How did Karl Rove defund the left movement during W's reign fit into all this?
Great question. Yeah, this is very connected to all of this. And in fact, the Republican Revolution of 1994, Gingrich was the visible one, but the real strategist was Dick Armey, who was an economist in his earlier career, who was a deep devotee of public choice economics, who was really trying to apply them in this period. So that strategy of defunding the left is like the rest of this stuff. Absolutely applying Buchanan's ideas about changing the rules in order to achieve the outcomes that you want. So absolutely. And it's also worth knowing that the Koch project to transform higher education is really surging and very aggressive now. They're on 350 campuses. And they're also funding these groups like Turning Point USA and Campus Reform to harass progressive faculty, but also Turning Point USA is investing dark money in student elections, student government elections. Yes. For the same kind of reason as your defund the left question. That's why I'm bringing it up, because the founder of this has boasted that basically they want to drive, progressive activities from campus. They want to close off the spigots that support things like the PERGs. I saw there was something here from PERG. There you are. Before, so they're really going after the PERGs and all of these other groups, and they want to steer all those student activity funds to these right-wing groups that otherwise don't really have a following among students. But if they win the student government elections, they'll be able to do it. So it's really shocking but sophisticated strategy.
Hi, over here, I guess.
Sorry.
Yeah, my parents lived in Wichita, Kansas for 30 years, which is where the Koch brothers are from. And by the way, the answer to what's the matter with Kansas is the Koch brothers. Because they really have changed the rules, and they're not particularly liked even in conservative circles in Wichita, because they really try to impose things. So a North Carolina question for you, though.
Yeah.
One of my best friends is a professor of evolutionary biology at Duke. And that's a very interesting territory to be that, even though the Triangle is a pretty progressive area. When you talk about this campaign to discredit science, almost the flat earthers notion, but climate change, everything else, that's got to be connected to this wider agenda you're talking about.
Absolutely, and the Kochs are among the leading funders of climate science misinformation, and they do that quite aggressively, and that's actually a case, too, where that leads me to the conclusion that what we're seeing now is a really deadly dogma, right? Because, there might be ordinary people who have libertarian ideas, totally understandable. You don't want people to go to jail for smoking pot, or you have questions about U.S. empire and blah, blah, blah. Fine for that. But the libertarian cause, as funded by Koch and this donor network, is so hostile to government that it cannot accept the idea that government would be needed to take action on a threat as big as the planet. So what do? They say there is no threat, right? And they try to systematically undermine understanding of the threat that we're facing while we have this very small window to deal with it. And I'll just give you one metric of how effective their efforts have been at, again, revising the rules to get the outcomes they want. In the early 1990s, there was no difference between the two political parties in their understanding of what was then called global warming, that it was man-made, needed attention. Right, of course, the political party differences about how they might handle it, but no difference on the science. And I have this figure in the book, by 2014, only eight of 278 Republican members of Congress would acknowledge that climate change was man-made. 8 of 278. I mean, this doesn't even exist anywhere else on the planet. It reflects this kind of libertarian, deadly dogma. And you won't be surprised to know that before the George Mason team that came together around Buchanan was pushing climate denial, they were doing research for the tobacco companies. So there's a deep history in this of systematic misinformation. So for those of you who are familiar with Naomi Oreskes' book, Merchants of Denial, it's that kind of story, but linked to this public choice ideology.
Thank you.
And what do you have to say about voting and how we conduct our elections and et cetera?
Yeah, so I think that you are right, that the next few years are going to be really decisive, and it is really time to listen up, pay attention, alert people, get involved. However, I actually do feel somewhat hopeful, and I feel that in part because I've been, since August, traveling every week, often to like 3 cities a week. There is just, people understand that something is going on, and that's across sectors of progressive politics, it's across all kinds of different demographics and communities. People are understanding that what is happening now is a very acute threat that is different from, even though in some ways a continuation of things that we have seen before, and I'm seeing such tremendous new thinking and energy and vision and new strategy going on and breaking down the silos in the way that you're talking about, groups coming together, figuring out how to address this, and the understanding is percolating up. Sometimes I think the media doesn't do a very good job of reporting on it, but it's worth knowing that 5 U.S. senators convened by Sheldon Whitehead of Rhode Island, also includes Elizabeth Warren and growing numbers of others, have actually been holding, they can't hold hearings, of course, because they're not in the majority, but they've been giving speeches on what they're calling the web of deceit. And the web of deceit is the way that the Koch network organizations are working through the Trump administration to radically change policies. And they've been filing FOIA requests for information and doing what they can. So I think a lot of people now are actively trying to alert people to what is going on, to find ways to deal with it. So I do feel hopeful, but I think, this is not the time to be too busy to pay attention, right? This is really the time when people need to get engaged. So I take your point and appreciate it.
Something that you mentioned in passing several times is around the media, free press, and for perhaps economic reasons or perhaps, our dumbing down of understanding what news is about and what it really is, and our patience with looking through more than 30-second sound bites. I'm thinking of the evening news, for example, when the weather report takes up 15 minutes of the whole show, and everything else is 3 or 4 sentences. And we've got the Federal Communications Commission doing all sorts of things as well. It seems that information is perhaps one of the antidotes to what is happening. What do you see about what may emerge around a free press, and are there ways in which we can improve the level of understanding among people through the public media?
I think that's a hugely important area, and it's not something that I was following in my research because I was really following this thread of enchaining democracy and trying to understand where it came from and where it was going. But the Koch network has been working, very much with Fox News, with Russia.